welcome into the Wrong Side of the Pond podcast. A little bit different intro than normal. Obviously, Jeremy's the one who normally does the cold start for every show. He is out of pocket this week, and we are joined with a guest host phoning in all the way from the cold, wintry north of Detroit. Joining us, not for the first time, but first time in a long time, Fletcher Sharpe of Daily Detroit. You can find him at Twitter on Saint FDW. Fletcher, it's great to have you back on the show, man.
Yes, thanks for thinking I'm worthy enough to even come back, let alone fill in for Jeremy. So that's moving up in the world.
Oh man, dude, it's always a pleasure to have you on, and it's no big shoes to really fill here. We're happy to actually have Jeremy off the show for a change. It's nice to get a little fresh breath of air in here. We'll be happy to have him back. But no, it's great to have you on. We've been meaning to get you on here for a while. It's been a minute since we've had you on to chat, and there's been a lot going on in Detroit, obviously within their soccer scene the last few years. That's how you and I actually became acquainted, was talking about the Cincinnati and Detroit MPSL teams that have now grown into much bigger things than what they previously were, and that's part of the reason we'll have you on, is talk about Detroit's move up to the USL Championship, and we'll get to that a little bit later on in the show. But with Jeremy down in Orlando this week with his family, we figured it would be great to just have you come on and chat, fill in for him as he would, because we've got plenty to talk about on our plate this week. Obviously, it's been a busy one in Europe, as it's maintained and continued to be for the last few months. And then things have been really crazy on the international side of things too. We've had the African Cup of Nations, which has been just really wild. And then, of course, there's all the other things that are going on in the world too that we'll certainly try to squeeze in there. So, Fletcher, I know that you're new to doing all the responsibilities, man. Do we want to just start with the biggest kind of storyline of the weekend, with the North London derby getting just completely canceled?
Definitely. I mean, that seems like a pretty good place to start, given that it's a pretty big game. Even if the teams are kind of not as glittery as they have been in the past, it's still a really important game. So to not have it played is, in my opinion, a pretty big thing.
It was definitely a big kick in the pants for me this weekend, being the big Spurs fan that I am. Obviously, I was looking forward to it a bit because Arsenal were looking a little depleted before the match, and obviously they were facing some injuries. They were facing suspension. Granit Xhaka picked up like his 100th red card in the last 50 games for them. And then they had, some players who are missing through African Cup of Nations duty as well. So they had all these people that were out, and they had this one COVID case that kind of cropped up. And as we've seen time and time again this year, that's come to be something that we've seen matches get postponed for. And Arsenal put in for a postponement, and the Premier League granted them to it. And normally that wouldn't seem too controversial, but it turned out to be, because lots of other teams, like yours included, have had far more infections, far more positive cases, and were denied those chances. So I don't know how it felt for you when you saw that go through. Was that annoying? How did you feel about it when you saw a team like Arsenal that really didn't have that many cases get a postponement?
I mean, my opinion on COVID basically is, look, I think if a team is saying we don't have enough people because of COVID, and there's a legit reason, which I think honestly is really one or two cases at this point, because all the players are really connected, I think they should be granted. I do think it's a little weird that, say, teams like Chelsea and Man City had far more people missing from COVID, and Arsenal did not, but theirs was granted. I'm glad to a degree, because you don't want people to get sick. Even though they are finely tuned athletes, they should be okay. They might not be okay. To a degree, I'm okay with it. I still think it's a little weird that there are some teams who will probably in the future file for a COVID postponement and then get told no, and just be told to just deal with what you have. I do think it's a little bit unfair to Tottenham from the standpoint of, like you said, they were facing an Arsenal team that's kind of depleted through injury, through COVID, through international duty, through suspension. And the team they face when they do face Arsenal will be a very, very different team with all those people potentially back. So I feel like they kind of got the short end of the stick. But, I mean, if this is going to be the start of teams actually getting their COVID postponement granted, then I'm okay with it. But if it's just like a one-off thing, then I have some questions.
Yeah, man. I mean, like, I see them being like, hey, we have this COVID case. Who knows how many people it potentially has impacted at the club? We're trying to figure that out. But we've also got these injuries and we've got these players who are away. And I think those are like, okay, those are things that everyone's kind of dealing with. But Chelsea, for instance, you guys have been like ravaged in injuries for the last like few months, it feels like. And you guys were stuck in some situations where you weren't granted some of the requests that you had asked for. Spurs earlier on in the year, they were the first team to really get hit hard by a COVID infection within the squad, and then they had their big thing that happened within the Europa Conference League, and basically they were trying to see if they could delay a match with Leicester so that they could then make up the match that they had yet to play in Europe. And the Premier League said no. And then, Spurs end up giving up that game entirely, forfeiting it, getting knocked out of the competition as a result. And then Leicester end up getting an infection a couple days later, and they ended up granting them the postponement after it would have mattered to Spurs. So it's just the inconsistency in which they're applying it that's really driving me up the wall at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it's when you leave things like this up to like people where it's like not we have a rule book, we have a set rule, we do XYZ. If this happens, leave it up to people's discretion. Stuff gets a little murky. I mean, we see that all the time with refs making calls on the field where it's like, is this a penalty? Is this not a penalty? Is this a handball? Is this not a handball? So we leave it to the same type of people to make decisions now, not just with calls, but also personal health. We're going to get situations where it's like, oh, we should be granted this. We have 4 or 5 COVID cases. And it's like, nope. But it's like, we have 1 or 2. Okay. Like, all right, sure. We'll give it because whatever. And I think honestly they might have given it because they're like, well, this will make us look bad. If we don't say yes here, we look really bad. And I think at times they try to do that just to try to save face a bit, not realizing it makes them look a little bit worse.
Yeah, I was gonna say as soon as they're trying to save face, they put egg right in their own. So the way that you're kind of saying this, it sounds like you're not really that upset with Arsenal or any of these teams are doing it. It kind of feels like you're like, hey, they've got an infection. Like, let's just make sure we're doing the safe thing here. I would then venture to say there's more blame in your opinion probably for the league than the actual teams that are asking for these requests at this point.
Kind of, yeah. I don't want to use personal situations a lot because that tends to make things a little bit different. But my league, when COVID started, we had a situation where we took the field and we saw 2 or 3 players from another team who looked like they were lagging behind a bit. And this is before we really knew what COVID was. They're like, oh, they look kind of sick or whatever, but maybe it's just a cold or whatever. We don't really know what's happening. We didn't really get what COVID was. Like 4 or 5 weeks later, the league issued an email where they're like, hey, if you played in the 10 o'clock slot for one of these 2 teams, one of the teams had 3 players test positive for COVID. So you all should go test yourselves now. And then from that one game, we had like 7 more people test positive. And I was like, it's literally just people who made some minimal contact with each other. But the fact that they're sharing the airspace long enough for that, like, could get to other people, like, if you feel that sick, you should have just not came and played. Even whether it's the cold, the flu, or whatever, like, you should just be smart enough to stay home. But, like, I feel like if you have a player who's sick and then this player's out or whatever, but, like, he rooms with another player or he hangs out with these other 3 or 4 players who have not tested positive yet, they come on the field and play. After the game ends, you have 5 or 6 more positive tests. It's just like I'm not really. I feel bad for the players, feel for the teams. I'm really more the league should do something better about this. We're into year 85 of having COVID. It feels like I feel like there should be more put into place to like manage situations like this. It shouldn't be like, oh, we don't know what to do now. Like we've been through this. You should have stuff in place to fix these things that are like consistent and like legit rules, and not like, well, I think we'll do this time, maybe something else differently the next time, because it creates consternation amongst fan bases and even amongst teams where it's like, well, what can we do at this point? Because we only have 12 or 13 outfield players. We're just doing the best we can, even putting academy players out there. And this team we're playing against has like basically a healthy roster just about. Maybe they're missing like 3 or 4 people from different instances, and one guy's sick, and you're like, oh, they don't have to play, but you do. Like, good luck with your academy debuts or whatever. So just I feel like the league should have something. I can't speak to what. I'm not one of the smart people who's in charge of that, but like the league should have something more in place to fix this that's like set in stone, where it's like, if A happens and we do B, or B happens we do C. Not like, well, opinion, we'll figure it out, because that's, again, it creates problems, and just we don't really need problems at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. It does feel like we should have better protocols. What are we, 2 years now into this pandemic? And, you're saying 83 years. It feels that way at this point. And what's crazy is, it feels like it's been forever, but the time crunch is such a big aspect of all this. And I think this quote from Antonio Conte that came out today, he said, if the Premier League decides to postpone games for injuries, it means maybe they have to try to make a better schedule. This is the first time in my life there's a league that's postponed a game for injuries. This is very strange, and I'm very surprised, right? And, Conte, maybe not so eloquently there, I think really struck at the heart of this problem is like, yeah, like injuries dictated this one. That's the reason it happened. It wasn't necessarily the COVID here. It's the injuries. That's why Arsenal felt all this pressure. It's extra annoying today to see that they've loaned out 2 additional players as well, this week, which, I guess they weren't available a couple days ago. But regardless, the schedule is what's really making this so chaotic. And they're running out of time. Spurs at this point now have 4 matches that they have to figure out a way to make up behind some of these other teams that are playing. And with the World Cup coming up next season and in the dead of winter, everything's already getting compressed. We've talked a lot about that on the show already. And the schedule is really starting to show its weaknesses now. And it's not necessarily just the Premier League's fault. It's also the FA, who hosts all these additional competitions that really ask all these things of players, having 20 teams in the top flight instead of the recommended 18, having these extra cup competitions. These add up and make things so tough. And this crazy Christmas period, all the other countries don't do this. Like we're only seeing this in England. And that's why these extra injuries are really starting to pile up for people. And you have guys playing 2-3 games in a week. And it's a lot to ask, especially when we're dealing with a pandemic on top of all that.
Yeah, I didn't really realize, and I hate to use Football Manager as an example because like people using video games as examples for real life stuff is kind of,
it's not a real thing.
Yeah. But like, I didn't really realize how congested the Premier League schedule was just from a standpoint of like teams until I was playing a save in the most recent Football Manager, and I got lucky that I was in like year 6, so I had some academy kids I brought up who are like starlets at this point. But it's like, yeah, I have to like rely on like 16-year-olds to like get us through some games against maybe some not great teams. But it's like I have to rely on them because all of my stars are tired. They can't play 3 games in like 9 days. They can't, physically cannot do it. So like, yeah, it's an issue, but as a video game, you can like do stuff to fix that. Real life, it's just, well, suck it up or don't. And like, that's a problem. Players are going to get hurt as a result because their bodies just aren't built to do stuff like that. And we're seeing it now, like with teams with Arsenal, etc., teams like that, even Chelsea to a degree, where like their bodies can't hold up to, they can't. They physically can't. And no matter how gifted of an athlete, how great of shape you're in, 9 out of 10 times, like if you have to play that many games in such short succession, eventually your body's going to be like, hey man, if you won't slow down, I'll slow you down for you. And we'll hopefully won't be anything serious, but if it is, like, hey, at least you'll get some rest now.
Yeah. I mean, it's tough to ask this much of all these guys, and be it video games or not, like That's a lot to pack into a short amount of time. And when you add in extra stressors like a deadly disease, like that can compound and make things really difficult. So yeah, I think it's really up to the Premier League, honestly, at this point to figure out a way and work with the FA to help minimize just the amount that these guys are being asked to deal with at this point. So let's move on from the postponement fiasco and not worry ourselves with when and how we're going to see a North London derby happen again at this point in the season. But let's move on to some of the other matches in the Premier League. Let's move in particular over to your boys, the Blues. They've been very active over this festive period and beyond. Quite a few times up against Spurs. They'll again face one another here in the not too distant future. But not a very good stretch for them over the last couple of days. I don't know if there's one in particular you'd feel like ripping the Band-Aid off with. Let's just start with the City loss. A 1-0 loss to Manchester City over the weekend. Do you feel like the injuries, the busy season are really starting to pile up for Chelsea in a bad way at this point?
So my problem with, I guess in a way I'm a Chelsea fan. I guess of all the teams in the league, I kind of gravitate more towards them. I was really more of a Drogba fan than anything. But
Yeah.
I'm kind of who's ever left. But at the beginning of the season, I worried about Chelsea when they were like scoring a boatload of goals, but it was like they're center backs and they're wing backs and not really anyone who's a forward. And I was like, that's not sustainable. Like you can't go through a season with your wing back scoring 20 goals. That's bad. That's bad sport. That's not good. So when now both starting wing backs hurt, you notice Chelsea's team is very much just not working out properly. And it's frustrating. The Man City loss kind of highlights that, where they put together a team that like wasn't terrible to start, but they just couldn't maintain the pressure they needed to, and like they kind of got dominated. And honestly, I'm a little bit surprised it was only 1-0 with a 70th minute goal. From what I saw, it could have been a lot worse. And I think in a way that losing is not good. I think they got lucky with a 1-0 loss. Now, the tie to Brighton, I had to watch it and not scare my pets because I was getting increasingly frustrated just watching them play. It feels like they have two separate teams on the field at times, where it's like we have half the team who wants to throw crosses into the box, and we have half the team that doesn't. And we put them together, and like they play, and you can see very obviously who wants to do what and who doesn't. And you're not going to beat teams. And people are. I have friends who are Manchester United fans, who some are City fans. Like, gotta watch out, Chelsea might catch us. And I'm like, they won't. They won't, because if they finish in the top 4, I'll still be surprised at the end of the season. If they finish there somehow, I'll be shocked, because they don't seem like they're just not clicking. Even today, when Ziyech scored his goal, he looked very upset. He didn't celebrate. He was like yelling at his team. He was mad. He scored an amazing goal, and his first instinct was to be like, "You're messing up defensively. It's making me have to work. Stop it."
Like I'm trying to motivate you by what I'm able to do out here.
Like that's a big problem. When you can't even find joy in your own spectacular feat because you're so upset at a teammate, that's not good. That's very bad. And I know Thomas Tuchel is great at diffusing those situations, as he had to do it a few times at PSG. But like this seems to a degree insurmountable, a little bit. So yeah, I don't know. Even talking about it, I'm like getting just the feeling of dread. Like they're gonna go out and play some other not great team, and like they play Tottenham next, and they play Burnley. They're gonna go play Burnley. They're gonna lose like 3-0, and I'm just gonna have to just not watch soccer for a week, because if you lose to Burnley, I think that's your punishment.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you'll undoubtedly beat Spurs, when they play each other again on Sunday. And then, whenever you guys end up losing this match to Burnley, you're going to be like, oh, that is, a pretty frustrating one too. So I don't know, it's a very up and down team. And you talked about gravitating towards that team because of a player like Drogba. Baby Drogba has returned to the club. He's not so much a baby anymore in Lukaku. it's got to be frustrating watching him now back in the squad. And sure, he's being influential. He's getting involved, but he's still not producing in a way that you really would expect a player of his expense, especially in the number of times they've made that expense to acquire him. You'd expect more out of him.
Yeah, and honestly, at first I was going to say it's not really his fault. It's not really his fault because he's not getting the service. But watching today really showed me that like it's both sides' fault because they're not crossing the ball to him. Like today against Brighton, that's a very tall team. They have players like Dan Burn who are like 1,000,000 feet tall. So I understand why you might be hesitant to cross the ball into the box.
Sure.
But like literally his game is crossing the ball into the box. You have to cross the ball into the box. If you don't, because he's not going to come get it, and that's his problem. Is if you're not going to come get the ball and do something, what are you doing? Like you're at this point, you're just a waste of space up top. It's the reason why when they had Eden Hazard, he was playing as a false nine striker. His problem was is he'd always come and get the ball, but he would never go wait in the box for ball to come to him, which is fair because he's never really scored with his head very often. So the
Right.
problem there was we have no target man. We have no one up top to wait for the ball to come to him and do something. With Lukaku, he goes and waits up top for the ball, but he does not go to the ball. Like he started going to the ball late before they subbed him out. Then they put Kai Havertz in there, who's not a forward at all. I don't know where people get this idea that he's a forward. When he was doing great things in Germany, he was being used as a 10 attacking mid. And he was just creating all types of just space and whatever. And he gets to England, they're like, okay, go up top. Like you're tall, go be a forward. And that's not how the sport works. And we've seen him struggle partially because of COVID, but partially because he's learning a position. And they put this huge price tag on him and expect him to just adjust. And that's just not if you sign Prime Lionel Messi and you're like, hey, go play defensive mid, he would be bad for a year. That's what's supposed to happen. He would just not be because he's learning what to do at that point. So
Yeah.
moving these players out of position is not helping Lukaku, but also him just not going to the ball. And he's like, well, you're not going to cross it. I'm going to stand here and just stand here. That doesn't help anybody because now you're just in the way. They can leave you alone because you can just trail offside and whatever. And just it you can see the issue with the way the team is set up, and like even boiled over to the point where he made that interview
Yeah.
and he had to apologize for it. But I don't really necessarily think he's wrong. I think Tuchel probably promised him a different kind of formation, and he gets here and he's like, we're not doing that actually. So suck it up, I guess.
Yeah, the tough bit about coaches changing their minds after they've lured you to come and execute for them is always at play there, and unfortunately, it's not going the way Lukaku I think envisioned it. No wonder he's making passionate pleas to potentially come back. How he wouldn't mind the idea of coming back to Italy, but that's neither here nor there for the time being. Chelsea will see if they can get their feet back underneath them again this weekend against their very familiar London rivals at this point. Let's move on to a team that was formerly managed by a very brief manager at Chelsea. And now a very brief manager at Everton. Rafa Benítez sacked after a 2-1 loss to Norwich City at the weekend for Everton. Kind of saw this one coming, didn't we?
Yeah, you lose to Norwich, you don't. No disrespect, 'cause I'm obviously not a manager. You lose to Norwich, you don't really deserve to have a job. Norwich is like not good, and I don't mean like not good like they're trying very hard, and like they're just not. When you're best player for your team, I saw it last year, uh, with who got relegated. Um, the name escapes me, but their best players for them were all players on loan, and I'm like, when your best player for your team is your player on loan, you're gonna have some problems. And Norwich's best consistent player is Billy Gilmore, who came from Chelsea, who doesn't even play that much anymore since the manager changed there. But like been the most consistent player for them, rated wise. Period. So if your best player is someone who you're going to lose when the year is over, you're gonna have some issues. And Everton started out. I expected great things from them. They had James Rodriguez. They had Richarlison, who I don't necessarily like, but he's a talented player. They had Calvert Lewin. They still have Seamus Coleman. I expected them to like at least maybe not finish top 4, but maybe finish in the top 8. And like they just aren't. Like they it's just not turning over for them. And eventually, yeah, if it's not going to turn over for you, you kind of got to reset. And in a league where if you don't produce, the fans will definitely let you know, as will the front office, and you got to do something. And if it's the players won't play for a manager, the manager has to go.
Yeah. Yeah, and unfortunately for Everton, again, they find themselves without a manager. Benitez sacked out the door. This has become a bit cyclical for the Toffees. We've seen them kind of go through managers, new mindsets. Ancelotti, he left them, really wasn't able to achieve that much with them, maybe stabilized them a little bit, but he leaves, and I know it's a different circumstance, a different set of players, a different league. But he's now just polishing the floor over in La Liga with Real Madrid. It kind of shows it seems like there's never enough of a full plan, a long-term plan at Everton. They buy in just players that don't really fit the equation at all, for all these various guys that come through to manage. And now they just don't have a cohesive unit. And they're again back in the same position again, where where do they go from here? Who's the next manager they're going to bring in to potentially reset again and start them off hopefully in the right direction? And you're hearing names like, Frank Lampard being mentioned, Wayne Rooney, who's a club legend to a certain extent, which is always a really dangerous prospect. And then another former Chelsea manager, and Spurs manager, and Manchester United manager. Jose Mourinho's name is potentially in the race now too. I don't feel like any of those are the right answer for Everton either. Where do you? I don't like. Where do they even go from here?
I mean, honestly, of the names you mentioned, Mourinho would be the best for this year because he would definitely stabilize them for this year. It's just next year they'd be terrible. Like, he'd get the best out of their players now. He would make sure that they run his system well enough now. Then he'd be like, all right, let's put my system fully in display. And, like, it would fall to pieces because they'd realize, oh, this guy actually kind of really is a jerk. And even though we know him, we've known commodity, he's been in England for a while. We've watched the Spurs All or Nothing. We've actually seen him intimately talk to players. People are still fooled when it's like, oh man, the players dislike this coach. Yeah, because we've seen it happen 4 times now. We see how he gets here. He starts. He's passionate about certain players. He wants to get them into the squad. He wants them to work, and we're like, perfect. And then the next year, he's like, I had all off season to think about stuff. Let's do it this way. And you're like, oh my god, this is awful. And even with he makes world class players look like they just learned the sport not long ago. So I think if you want to stabilize, I'd be like, oh, bring him in for this year and then, get rid of him. Quickly get rid of him immediately. Once the last game is played, once the ref blows the whistle for the last game of the season, awesome. You're terminated. New manager, please.
Yeah. I mean, they're used to getting in guys and getting rid of them quickly at this point. It wouldn't be that bad to just hire and fire Mourinho outside of, probably endless amounts of money you'd have to pay him for severing a contract. But yeah, I mean, who knows at this point? I think it's, they may as well just hit the total chaos button at this point and bring in Jose and see what kind of, craziness he can inspire from them for 6 months before it all goes down the toilet. The only other match that I really had circled from this past weekend that I thought was worthy of mention was Aston Villa 2, Manchester United 2. The Red Devils went up on the host 2-0 through Bruno Fernandes, had a double, first half and second half strikes from him. And then Villa just flipped the games, on its head. And the final 15 minutes of the match, Jacob Ramsey getting one. And then Philippe Coutinho, the new star arrival for new manager Steven Gerrard, bails them out with a great finish in the 81st minute. Feels great to have Coutinho back in the league, watching him and the way he can play. If he's a confident guy, he's really fun to watch. But also makes Villa, he's like the almost like the perfect Jack Grealish replacement, like that wild card type player.
Definitely, he's someone who I don't know outside. I guess I kind of do realize why, but in the country of England, when he puts his foot on a ball, he's this magician. He just makes things work. But when he plays for Brazil or he played in any other team that's not in England, he looks hesitant. He looks very unsure of himself, and it's very strange because this is someone I've literally watched decimate uh, all league, all league defenders, all first team, second team defenders, and then he goes to Germany, he goes to Spain, and like he is up against some defenders who are same level, some defenders who are very much not the same level, and he looks very unsure of where to go. So to see him come back in first game, have a very positive start is for me great. The thing I'm worried about with Manchester United is they brought in this manager who's supposed to make them press and be a pressing team, and their press has looked terrible. And I don't know what if I were them, I don't know what to do. Even the fans now are like, I don't want this guy managing anymore. And like he's been there maybe a month. They're like, yeah, I think we're good on him. Like you can keep the interim title because we don't want you when the next season starts. And like it's tough because obviously you're trying to implement a system that's being used to a degree. But like yeah, the players who are supposed to be pressing for them just they don't look good. And I don't understand where the disconnect is because to me it feels like they're playing the same exact system they were before, just about maybe a few moving pieces, but like it just isn't working for them, and I don't get it. Like I understand tactics well enough, and I'm looking at it, and I'm just looking at pictures and looking at video, and I'm like I don't. It at this point it's just the players. It's like you need to get better players. Yeah, I mean they've been circling a few. I know one they were rumored to be looking at was Brighton's Tariq Lamptey, who I think would fit well for most teams. Definitely fit well for them. But yeah, outside of just getting new players, like I don't know what they're supposed to do because they have quality players. I mean, maybe get Matic out of there because while I love him, he's very old. And he just can't move anymore, and that's just a liability. Yeah, but outside of that, I really don't know, and it's. I'm sure as a fan, it's super frustrating to be like, we have this manager who's going to make us press, make us do these amazing things, and like, it's not working. It's not working, and like you don't know what to do next at that point. It's kind of stuck. You're kind of in the mud, as the kids say.
Yeah, I mean Ragnick was as you said brought in to bring in this pressing mentality. And it always seemed weird to me, like from the start, like you're talking about how these guys that are supposed to be pressing aren't looking that good in the pressing game. Well, yeah, like none of them are really brought in to play pressing soccer at all. And it's weird. Like I feel like, Ole for the last few years has been this players manager, like just to, go out and get them guys and rah rah and, show them the spirit and put in hard tackles and that'll be enough. And now they're playing it for a system manager who is potentially, if he doesn't get the full-time gig, he's going to have a hand in the next manager they bring in, which you would presume to be someone, that would have a similar mentality. So it's a very odd situation that United find themselves in. Like, if they just cancel this whole Ragnick experiment, it's like, well, what is the plan? Yeah, like we talk about it with Everton. What is the plan? These feel like two clubs that are like headless horses, or headless horsemen. They have no one really driving their train at all. They're just moving forward and buying pieces that seem like they might continue to make you move forward, but if they don't all fit together, it's not necessarily the most cohesive unit. So it's a really odd fit for them, and certainly another setback. As great as it was for Villa to get that result at home with their new star signing, it's just another bad run of results, or at least a bad result and a bad run of results for Manchester United.
That's kind of the beautiful part of the sport, where you could have like 11 really talented, world class type players who just don't fit, and you can have one team of players who are at best are like North Conference level, but playing together, they're like one of the best teams in the country. And that's the part I love about the sport is you can take those players apart separately and just they are not good players, but in one unit they work well. And with Manchester United, we're seeing they have I wouldn't say 11 world class players, but they have a lot of world class players playing together who just they all look lost. They all get in the field together like, well, what are we supposed to do now? Like I don't.
Yeah, it's tough.
I'm positioned here. You're positioned here. Someone has the ball. Like, do I move or do I? They look like they're relearning how to play the sport after like a year or two off, and it's very strange just to see players who were tearing it up in other leagues just get here and just look lost entirely. I understand, like you said, leagues are very different from country to country, but like they look like they don't understand the sport at all, and it's such a Twilight Zone moment for me.
Yeah, it definitely is. Well, let's get in from one Twilight Zone and move into another complete Twilight Zone across the ocean, or at least down across the sea from Europe and down into Africa, where we're seeing the African Cup of Nations play out, and they're currently wrapping up the group stage. I don't know if you've had much a chance to follow along with the tournament. I don't have beIN Sport anymore, so I've been like back in my pirating early days in the 2000s. I feel like a bit, getting in on those streams, and I've been able to watch some of the tournament, and it's been just craziness. We talked a little bit last week about the refereeing fiasco that unfolded. And then it's not just been that, it's just been some crazy results too. And I don't know, it's a really fun tournament that I feel like doesn't often get the light shined on it. It's been a highly chaotic and enjoyable affair so far.
Yeah, Arsenal are complaining about they need their players back. They're going to get one back because Ghana's going home, which really honestly breaks my heart. But to be fair, when you rely on a strike force of the reanimated corpse of Andre Ayew and then his very selfish brother, Jordan Ayew, you're not going to beat many teams. I don't really care what the tournament is. I don't even care if it's the sport of football or soccer. That's just not going to get it done. And it's really frustrating that I mean, it's great for the tournament, but as a fan of Ghanaian soccer, it's really frustrating to see that just they're hoping to show up and use their name to like get victories, and it's not working for them. And
Yeah, I mean
but
they were dumped out by, who was it, Comoros today,
yeah,
who was debutantes in the tournament. They've never actually qualified before, and they're ranked 132nd in the FIFA rankings.
Comoros hadn't scored a goal in the Africa Cup of Nations ever until today, where they scored 3. So, um, yeah, I mean it's again, the tournament is awesome. I've watched a fair amount of it. I have Sling, so I have beIN Sports, like the one random channel to show something. I was using the method of hopefully Fubo doesn't hear this and cancel all my accounts. Of starting a Fubo trial and then watching for 6 days and then canceling it on the 7th, where I'm like, all right, I don't want it anymore. So I've been able to watch Africa Cup of Nations that way, plus using Sling. So I've watched a fair amount of the tournament, and like the play has been good. I like, as much as I lament about teams like Ghana being out, I appreciate the fact that some of the smaller teams are able to play and actually make some progress. I know some people are annoyed at some of the international tournaments for adding extra teams. Africa Cup of Nations did that, and people were like, well, who wants small countries like Comoros Island or Cape Verde to like actually get in and get a chance to play? And like they're showing why they deserve to be here. They're beating some Cape Verde tied to Cameroon, and they have a bunch of star power on their roster. And we mentioned Comoros Island beats Ghana. They have a slim chance to qualify for the next round. Not likely, but I mean, there's a chance. Every third place team gets a small chance to maybe go through. So yeah, just to see these teams really play. Guinea-Bissau held Egypt to 1-0 win, and honestly, it could have been a tie. The goal they scored unfortunately got ruled off. If I was a referee, I would make the call because their winger was fighting for the ball with the Egyptian defender. And the Egyptian defender just went down, and then the winger cut back in and scored. The ref was like, "Well, the foul happened before the shot, so no goal." and they showed the replay, and you see the defender just go down. Like he got beat. And I was like, I feel bad for them because they'll probably never get a chance like this again to do so. And they were robbed. And VAR is there, and VAR was like, well, inconclusive. So you had to go with what the official says. And I felt bad for them. But just to see like small countries like that without the prestige of Premier League stars or La Liga stars or Serie A stars go out there and just duke it out with these super teams for their continent is like I love international tournaments for that reason alone. Just because you see these small countries who maybe have 1 star, maybe it's 2 stars, but like not much else, go out there and just compete and just do the best they can. The thing I mentioned before about 11 players who might not be the best but work together versus a team full of stars who just don't like each other. Yeah, it's interesting to watch. And I love it. It's also amazing for me because one of the tournaments where like I love these. I don't know how you feel. I don't know how many other people feel. It's one of the tournaments where when you see a really important goal, everyone celebrates. Like everyone celebrates. Against Ivory Coast, Sierra Leone scored a really late equalizer goal after their keeper for Ivory Coast fell, injured himself, and lost the ball. And the entire like bench and almost all 11 players ran to the corner and celebrated with their player. And I'm like, that's amazing to me. Like I love that because it shows like this is really like passionate. One of my favorite celebrations ever. Colombia scored a goal and like 8 of their players went and did a little bachata in the corner. And I'm like, this is they care. This is a thing of like, this is my nation, whatever. And I appreciate that because it shows that like, you see people say, well, I want to go play for the national team. I want to go do this because like whatever. These people actually want to be here. They want to play against all these teams here. It's not about, well, my contract releases me. Well, if you're going to pay whatever, it's like I'm here with people who I enjoy being around. And even though this tournament might not be anything on my own dossier, it could be something for someone else on here. And like the fact that we're doing this together means a lot. And like I love that. I really do. So to see another tournament that's kind of goofy in terms of the results, but like the play is still, there've been a few games that have been like not good. But you know, you get that with every single tournament. So to see the excitement still there, to see some big names might get knocked out. Currently, Algeria is on the bubble right now. They need to beat the Ivory Coast to advance, which is a very tall task at this point.
Well, and it's crazy. Like Algeria are holders. They're the current holders of the tournament, and they're sitting bottom of their group. If they beat, this is even more wild. If they beat Ivory Coast, and depending on how the Sierra Leone Equatorial Guinea match goes, Algeria could still finish top of the group too. So they could literally like turn the group completely upside down.
And like, just stuff like that is crazy to me. Like I enjoy the craziness that is African Cup of Nations because you don't see that really much in other tournaments. Like obviously, the Euros have their own craziness. CONCACAF has their own craziness. The Asia, I'm not sure the full name. It's the acronym looks like AFCON as well, but it's not.
Yeah.
AFCON. They all have their own different types of craziness, but it always seems like every single year something in the African Cup of Nations, just something happens where you're like, wow. What's happening over there? Like and that's when I first started watching the cup, it's like I had to tune in to see what happened. I know one year they had to halt the game for a minute because everyone had their vuvuzela way too loud. The officials like, I can't hear anything. Everyone stop, please, because I can't hear anything in the speakers. And like they actually had to like have some people like escort it. And I'm like, this is nuts. This is like a legit tournament. And even this year with the officials stopping the game like 6 minutes early, then stopping it again early and being like, you know what, I called the whistle a second time, I'm done, I'm not doing it. I'm leaving, I don't care, there's still time on the clock. No, there isn't, because the official has the last say.
I mean, they're saying now that that referee potentially had heat stroke and that was what might have caused it. Sure. Yeah, I mean, like, I feel like my introduction to the Cup of Nations, at least when I first was able to, like, watch it and follow along with it, was back in 2010 when it was hosted in Angola, and the Togo national team bus was attacked by gunmen. Like, that's I mean, I know that's a way out in left field, but that's the kind of stuff that I feel like can just happen at the African Cup of Nations in a way that you don't really expect that to happen at like a World Cup in Italy or anything like that.
No, and like that's again, like obviously it's not great news. Like I'm not trying to glorify like
Yeah. No.
being held up, but it's like that's not gonna happen like ever at any other tournament except this one, and like it all gets resolved. Like it's the thing that these things pop up, they all get resolved typically for like the good, and it's like, well, that happened, and then you just have to move on because there's also a game being played as well. Like it's weird. But I it's also good. These tournaments are good for me to see players who might not get as much run for their club team in like different positions. One player in particular, Mohamed El Neni for Egypt and Arsenal. For Arsenal, he's kind of like a bit player, a little bit. He plays sometimes, doesn't play as much. For like Egypt, he's like one of their main midfielders, which is a problem because he's not as talented as he used to be anymore. But like he still gets he's still like the guy. He's not obviously the big guy because that is more Mohamed Salah, maybe
Mhm.
Trezeguet, but like he's still a main feature for them. Zambo Aguisa is a player who for his club, for his country, he's our star guy. Watch out for him. And just seeing the players elevate themselves for their country is like, to me it's nuts, and I love it. I personally love just seeing. It's almost like when USA basketball had to play against Puerto Rico and they lost because Carlos Arroyo scored like 40 points.
Oh yeah, I remember
Carlos
that.
Arroyo would like for the NBA would maybe average about maybe 9-10 points for his career, but for Puerto Rico he was like Superman. He was scoring 35 points every game, and when he retired, it was JJ Barea who was like scoring 30 points a game. And it's like this is to see these players just be different for their national team just because they have to be different for their national team. Another player, Pau Gasol, not to get off soccer entirely, Pau Gasol in the NBA was like a flopping machine for his first 6 years. He gets the ball, he falls. For Spain, he was like dunking on people and giving him like growling faces. And I'm like, this is not the guy who plays in Memphis. I don't know who this guy is, but if we brought this guy back to the U.S., no one would ever bother him because they'd be afraid of him. But now they're like, whatever. So just seeing these players just I don't want to say change who they are, but unlock a different part of themselves and see them do things you don't normally get to see. I love it. I honestly do.
Well, let's embrace the chaos, embrace the abuse of free trials so that we can all watch the rest of the tournament if we aren't people who have access to it regularly as well. Let's switch gears entirely, pivot off of the African Cup of Nations, and dive into something that's a lot closer to you, that you're far more intimately familiar with than we are, and we're going to rely on some of your expertise here. And let's talk about Detroit City FC, their kind of meteoric rise. And we don't, we've talked plenty on this pod. Hopefully, everyone who's listening is familiar with their rise up the ranks of American soccer from semi-professional squad to now fully professional, playing in the American Second Division. Kind of this just amazing, almost rags to riches type of story with Detroit City, all kind of driven by their amazing fan engagement, and they've become this cult identity within American soccer. We wanted to bring you on when this first happened, and it didn't really work out. And we're going to pick your ear on this now that they're about to embark on that first league campaign in the USL Championship. What does it feel like to you seeing them, go from this, almost like, passion project to now this actual legitimate franchise, which is something that their fans may shudder at, but it's kind of been this amazing transformation.
It's weird. For two reasons. One, it's weird because outside of like the soccer fan, or the guy who's like, I care about the weird things around the city. A lot of sports fans don't really care in Detroit. Like they'd much rather just be miserable watching the Lions, Tigers, Pistons, and Red Wings just lose versus a team that literally went one full year without losing a game. And you mentioned like Detroit City FC, they're like, yeah, so And then they turn away, and you're like, all right, weird. That's for a city that likes to have a team full of winners. To see people just go whatever is strange. But from a standpoint of someone who actually is watching this, this also becomes a 2-part. So I guess it's 3 parts. It's
Yeah.
weird because if you'd asked me 10 years ago if I ever saw them like being in the second division or MLS close enough team, which I found out they have aspirations of being an MLS team, I would have said no. 100% no. Second division, did they make a second division, like something else for them to play in that's not USL? No. But to see them here is to show like how the owner group realized like we actually have something we knew we had some power in our hands before, but to see we actually have something that's legitimately powerful now is crazy. And even just following them, just watching the players they used to have playing for them to the players they have now, it's insane to just see the growth and how not just on the field, but they've gone from just being a men's semi-professional team to being a men's pro team, looking to have a women's pro team, looking to have a women's U23 and a men's U23, looking to have a bunch of youth teams all spread out. Like they're building the entire organization as if the way that they described it is a club you can never grow out of. Like you can be a kid who joins a youth team, who then plays for one of their youth teams throughout high school. Then maybe you go play with U23s in college. Then maybe you potentially get drafted or signed by the pro team. And just to see it's crazy. Like to see them go from Cass Tech, where they had about 4,000 fans, to building an expansion to their stadium to maybe have 13,000 people in a stadium. I would have never imagined that at all. And to see the growth of it, like you said, the rapid ascent is nuts. It honestly is. It's the best word I can use is nuts, because I never, even them having those international friendlies where they brought over like Frosinone or St. Pauli or Necaxa from Mexico, just was like, all right, well, they're not sending over their top players, they're sending over like youth kids or like maybe a few people who start, but like a lot of people who don't start. And like now you're getting to the level where like if we have one of those friendlies, they'll send over their actual like number ones. Maybe they won't get all the playing time. They're going to send over actual like people we've seen play in big games will be on this field at Keyworth. So just it's crazy for me to see that. I'm happy for the people who are involved, because I know they put a lot of work in there. Happy for most of the fans. Some of the fans are really having a hard time adjusting to this, just because they're very at times maybe a little bit counterculture, which I understand why, but I mean, if you're really club over country, a club over league, then you should just be happy that your club is now thriving a bit more than it was before.
Yeah. There's a couple things that I want to circle around on there that you touched on. One is this, you were talking through, this amazing perspective from the soccer community, right? You're looking at it that way and you're like, oh, that's, a great story. And I'm looking at it the same way. Like from the outside, Detroit City is like revered in American soccer, lower level ranks at least. But it's interesting to hear how they still haven't really made the mark in the local market and how they're not really an entity within, the local sports scene. And obviously Detroit has this long tradition, big four teams that have been in town. Most of the time they've been really bad. I know there have been some punctuated times where the Red Wings and the Pistons have been good, and like, all the other teams have flirted with the idea of being okay at times. But what's it going to take for them to crack into that scene, or do you think that's really even something that's possible?
Truthfully, people have said it a lot of times on the internet, and like at first I kind of resisted the idea because I thought if you like something, you're gonna like it. Or for them to be an MLS team, that's really it. You see a lot of people saying it's great that you're in NISA, it's great you're in the USL Championship. Call me when you're in the top division. I don't care about your team being in the top division. I don't care if you're bad in the top division, you just be in the top division team. And I'm like, it's really weird that you would rather be a fan of a team that's terrible but in the top division than be a fan of a team that's a champion in the second or third division. Like, I don't understand that mindset at all. Like, wouldn't you rather be a fan of the team when they're growing? That way, when they get to be the top, you're like, I've been a fan all these years, all this time. I watched them grow from being a little caterpillar to being this big old butterfly instead of just jumping on when they're a butterfly. Like, I that's me. Like, I'd rather put in the time to like watch something grow versus like, oh, you're good now? Okay, fan. I'm a fan now. I've been a fan for whatever. And I've seen some fans do that. Some fans who were fans of other local teams, AFC Ann Arbor, Grand Rapids, Lansing, whatever Lansing team you want to name. And then as DCFC kind of crawled up a bit more, they're like, oh, I'm a fan now. Pick me. I'm a fan. And just, yeah, in the Detroit market, though, just they don't really care. And it's, again, strange. You listen to talk radio and you'd rather have people talk about the Lions losing their 7th game in a row and not the DCFC just clinched the NISA title with 6 games left to go after beating a team, whatever. You see, they'll bring it up and they'll talk for like 2 minutes and people are like, I don't care. And it's so weird. It's so strange to me, but it also puts DCFC in a really weird place because those same fans who were super happy that DCFC was like, they're the kings of counterculture. They're not going whatever. Then moving the USL Championship, they're like, wow, you sold out. Now I hate you. Now you're enemy number 1. And I'm like, I don't get that either because you were so hard. You were so much onto this roster, so much onto this team. You knew the ins and outs of this team. And they make one switch to like better their team and better like, the organization you care about. And now you hate them. Like, did you ever really like them, I guess, is my question.
Yeah. No, it's, also interesting. I think that bleeds into the second question that I really wanted to loop around on there. And you saying MLS is the thing that might move the needle finally to make them relevant within the market itself. You said something really briefly on this in your initial kind of intro into the topic. The actual move to MLS. Do you think that's something that the club actually has any serious ambitions for? And that's something we've speculated on here, right? When the move to USL came about, there was talk of additional investment that happened within the team and how there's going to be all this growth. You talked about potential investment in the stadium to seat 12 to 15,000, which is all great stuff. You probably need some of that to be in the USL as well. But that move to MLS, that dangle the carrot, the Detroit's been in the conversation before. Do you think that's a realistic thing? And is that something you feel like the club are willing to pursue?
2 to 3 years ago, no. 100% just, even if you move to the USL Championship, I figured it would be inevitable, but I figured it'd be happening like down the line when I have like a beard full of gray hair. Like, sure, when I'm almost done covering soccer, I can't play anymore. I'm doing whatever. Maybe then they'll start the process. But when they hired Trevor James from the Indy 11, he started moving the team in a way where it's like, all right, we're going to go through NISA as if it's a professional league, which it is a professional league. I don't mean to take shots at NISA. It's very much professional. They pay their players, etc. They don't pay the referees, but that's a different story. When they hired him to do that, I kind of noticed like, okay, this team's moving a bit differently. Like, they're kind of carrying themselves with a different bit of air of professionality that I've seen other teams do, but not really like to their core. And then when the announcement came out that they're going to the USL Championship, I was like, okay, when? They're like, next season. I was like, that's what? And then even during the press conference they held afterwards, Trevor James, I don't remember the exact quote, I'll just paraphrase it, where he was like, the only reason why this club is not in the MLS because there's no promotion and relegation. But if they keep moving the way they're moving the next 2 to 3 years, I don't see why not. And I was like, to have your head coach say that publicly to all of the media who are paying attention, they would like to go to the MLS. Like, they are not content staying where they are right now. They've shown their cards to show that if we're moving up the ladder, we're going to keep moving up the ladder. And one of the owners, Alex Wright, made a very good point. He's one who mentioned the whole growing club you never grow out of. He said that other sports in this town have the luxury of being bad because if you grew up a Lions fan, you're a Lions fan. You grew up a Tigers fan, you're a Tigers fan. Same with Pistons, Red Wings, etc. But DCFC, if we're not good continuously, kids will stop playing soccer. They'll go to a different sport because soccer in the U.S. is still growing, but it's not bigger than basketball or football. So if a kid can see that he can play basketball or football and support their professional team at the highest level, but he can't do the same with soccer, he'll leave our sport to go there. So we need to keep having upward mobility to make sure we retain kids young so they can keep watching and becoming fans and then growing into adults who have kids who want to be fans, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, I think they're legit serious about making an MLS team because they want to keep the fans they have. They want to keep moving forward and getting more fans. Now, they'll probably lose a few who think that they're plasticky and not a real down for the cause club. But I think you offset that loss with the massive amounts you gain from people who are just like, I'll watch your club if it's a professional major league team, as opposed to second division or third division. And my only problem, I think the hurdle for them, as a lot of MLS teams have this issue, is if they try to become an MLS team, I don't know where they're going to build a stadium downtown because there's no space downtown at all. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a curmudgeon who hates traffic, but like there legit isn't really anywhere to build downtown where they could have their own soccer specific stadium. Because while Keyworth is nice, Keyworth is not.
It's not MLS quality.
No, it is not MLS stadium. It's great for the championship. It's great for NISA for sure, but you cannot know. And also it's a high school. They share it with a high school. You cannot share a pro stadium in the top of the flight with a high school. That's not going to fly at all.
No.
Yeah.
No, it's really not a tenable situation. That's what we've always speculated about is like, in order to make that move up to the top flight, they're going to have to get in a serious deal investor to move some of the pegs that are necessary to make that happen in Detroit. We've always kind of wondered, like, are the Fords secretly involved now in Detroit City, and could this potentially be a part of a larger project that they're finally brewing up? If you remember back to the original MLS pitch to or from the Detroit bid, it was from the Fords and the Gilberts, and obviously the Gilberts are a different equation entirely, but the Ford family obviously has deep roots and ties within the city. That's how you can rope in Ford Field and potentially use that. But all the branding for the team was Detroit City stuff. And we've always been like, was that like just pure laziness on behalf of the people who were involved in that process? Or is there like a little bit more cooking there than maybe people are willing to admit?
So I do know their new investor they have who is financing a lot of the money for this move. They wouldn't say who it is, but all the owners, and honestly, the owners I know personally, they have no reason ever to lie to me. I take him at face value, everything they say. They said he's a regular guy. He's a guy who has a bunch of money who wanted to invest. He's not anyone famous. He's not big business owner. He has his own business. He has money, and he wanted to invest. So yes, that's literally it. He asked to be kept out of the public, so we're doing that. Similar service, keeping him out of the public. I don't think it's the Fords. I don't think it's Dan Gilbert. I don't think it's anyone. I just think it's some guy who is like. Essentially, I think it's like a nicer version of George Yunkai from the Michigan Stars, who just has a bunch of money and is like, I would like to invest in a sports team, and maybe not as off kilter as that guy. Which I think is the best part of them moving out of the USL Championship for two reasons. Because one of them, I'm petty. Number one, I think it gets them away from the Stars, who have been shown to ride the coattails of wherever DCFC goes. And I'm not saying that as like, again, I have to stress for people who ask, I'm not a fan of DCFC as I am media, and I'm traditional actual media, which is hard for people to swallow, hard for me to swallow at times. People calling me professional makes me feel uncomfortable. But I can't really be a fan and remain impartial. So like I do the best I can to like not be a fan. I appreciate what they've done, but like you will not really see me like going away and be like, oh my God, it's amazing. Like I support all of Michigan except for the Stars, because the Stars are like a weird, awful organization. I won't get too much into it. But whenever DCFC goes somewhere, the Stars are like, oh, cool, we're coming too. And as long as the USL Championship still has territory rights, which I'm not sure when those are going to expire, The Stars cannot become the USL Championship, and that makes me very happy because I know as soon as it was announced, George was like sitting at his laptop, just like steaming, like full on steam out of his ears and head, just like, where do I go now? Yeah, anything that gets you away from an organization that just wants to copy you and do stuff wrong and is just not run very well is good for me. I think a big thing that Detroit City FC fans I thought would have a hard time with, which they're kind of not, which in a way is refreshing, is losing some of their star players who they loved but really weren't effective. I kind of wondered about that when FC Cincinnati went from the USL Championship to the MLS. I wondered about some of the players that they really loved who were really good, like my man Russell Cicerone.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I was like, he's not an MLS player. He's gone to the MLS once, did not work out well for him at all. He's been shown he's not an MLS player. Will they be pushing to try to get him back to the MLS because he's on the roster? Will fans be okay with him just, saying, yeah, I can't do that, and then leaving? So my biggest worry for Detroit City FC fans was so many of their players they loved were like quality guys who were like coaches in the area or like fans or something else where like they had a touching story about how they got to the club. I'm like, that's really touching, but you're a 38-year-old holding midfielder with no foot speed. You can't play at the pro level. Like, no disrespect to you at all. You're a much better player than I am, but you cannot play at the pro level. And I need the fans to understand that too, because if they're trying to push for you to be in the heart of the roster, you're going to be a bad, bad team. And that was my biggest thing with DCFC. If I was a fan, was their roster for Nisa. No disrespect to the rest of Nisa, but like at times they put out starting lineups where they're like, you know what, we're gonna win this game. Let's put a few people in who don't really play as much just to get their legs kicking in the water. And while the championship is not all full of teams that are just all great, there are some bad teams, obviously. Like, you can't do that week in, week out. Like, you can afford to do that in Nisa because you have a 15-point lead in the next closest team. But, like, you won't be the best team in the championship. Tampa Bay, Phoenix, El Paso,
Louisville.
Better than you off rip. Just off rip, whatever. And I'm not even including the teams just underneath them. So I think I think they need to prepare for, and they've so far been handling it well, just players you like, players you love. Roddy Green, perfect example, was a fan, part of the Northern Guard, cheered them on in high school at Cass Tech, went to Saginaw Valley, went somewhere else, ended up making the professional roster. One of the heartwarming stories of a fan becoming a pro player. He's forever etched in city history as the guy who hit the last PK against the Michigan Bucks to send them to the next round of the U.S. Open Cup. Amazing story. But, like, he barely played in Nisa. You definitely cannot play in the USL Championship. If you're not able to play it much in the division below, moving up, unless like you're hurt or something, that's it for you. And you understand that. And he's like, yeah, I'm leaving the club after the time I've been here, and I appreciate it. And fans are like, you know what? That's the right choice. And I'm like, that's good. You're accepting the fact your team's gonna have to change. Awesome. Yeah, so just I think people who are fans of the club just should be ready for some change to happen. Because it's going to happen. And the better you are at accepting that, the better I think they'll be going forward. As long as Trevor James builds a roster that I think is full of players who he trusts, plus players who have some experience at the championship level, because the game's much faster, I think they'll be fine. I don't think they're going to win the league. I don't think they're going to maybe might make the playoffs their first year, maybe finish 7th or 8th seed. But, like, yeah, I think doing stuff like that at a higher level will attract more fan base, will attract more local media, because as of right now, I think there's only 4 people who cover Detroit City continuously, and I'm one of them, which is weird to me because I just, you don't really expect to see yourself, not really imposter syndrome, but you don't really expect to see your people like counting you to hear stuff. You take a week off from covering something and people are like, well, I don't have any news about it. What happened? So that's really what made me realize, like, wow, big time media is still not really talking about them. You have their fans asking like Channel 4, Fox News, CBS, etc., like, hey, cover our team now, cover this. And it's like, well, if they're not doing it now, they're just not. So yeah, I don't really know. I guess, like I said, I guess the way they're going to change that is just MLS. That's really it. That's like the common denominator for most people saying, I will watch your club if it's an MLS club, which I understand. but also like it just feels strange to me.
Well, we will all have to wait and see what unfolds there. I'm excited to see what becomes of Detroit City in their first year in the USL Championship. Let's move on to the final segment of the show, winners and wankers, where we select our winners and wankers from the last week of American soccer. I'll go ahead and jump in first here. My wanker this week, I'm going to go with a pretty normal whipping boy within the wanker ranks, and that's FIFA President Gianni Infantino, who's really just not even trying to hide his corruption anymore, as it's been revealed that the FIFA president now actually lives in Doha, Qatar. He's saying it's because he needs to make sure the World Cup goes off without a hitch. I don't recall other FIFA presidents moving to wherever World Cups are being held in the past, unless they already lived in that country. So it seemed like this is just one of those oh my God, I can't believe this guy is so openly doing this. He's sending kids to school in Qatar. He's now moved there, and FIFA are literally headquartered in Zurich, Switzerland. That's really not that close at all. So my wanker this week is FIFA President Gianni Infantino for being a douchey, corrupt bastard and moving to Qatar.
I guess to build off that, mine would just honestly just, in a way, I guess it'd be him again. Not really this week, but for his talk about maybe making the World Cup a 2-year thing.
Oh man,
as I mentioned earlier, players playing a lot of games in short succession is bad for their health. So making a huge tournament and adding more teams and more games and saying we'll play every 2 years is horrible. And I think it's a horrible thing to great tournament. It's a way to kill it, honestly, in my opinion. It's a way to say, you know what, we are going to try to qualify with our F team and hope that it goes through. And if it doesn't go through, well, then this great nation of, say, Italy or Spain or the Ivory Coast or Brazil, it's we can't qualify because all of our people are hurt. And also, again, there's a pandemic. So we have to make sure we're bringing these people from different parts of the world to this one place, and we make sure that everyone's okay. So to the fact that he's still yeah, but the money though, right? We'll make way more money. No, you suck. That's don't admit very publicly the quiet part out loud. Don't
oh
do
man,
that. Don't say the quiet part super loud where it's hey, we'll make a lot of money if we do these things. And even so, to piggyback again off that, the World Cup being in Qatar, period. They're literally throwing dead bodies to build this tournament, and that makes me uncomfortable. And then you're hey, people are dying, but this game's gonna be amazing, huh?
yeah, I know, right?
That's a problem.
Sports washing at its finest. I'm gonna switch gears here. I'm gonna switch over to my winner this week. This one was one I found a little surprising, but glad to hear it. The Mexican Football Federation has announced that they are going to issue 5-year bans from Mexico games for any fans who are ejected from stadiums for using the homophobic chant that we've heard so frequently over the years chanted out there by Mexican fans. I'm really excited that they're putting this out there, that they're announcing it. Now I just actually need to see them follow up on it. And see if they can actually deliver on a promise like this, because it's something that their fans, and if you talk to certain segments of people from the Mexican culture, that will say hey, it's just not an offensive thing. Just because you guys keep saying it's not offensive doesn't mean that it's not. And any sort of action here is good. And I know that the players have asked the fans to stop doing it. I know that they've tried to come up with other creative ways to encourage fans to not do it, but it seems like a ban is probably the next place they need to go, and I'm at least glad to see there's some sort of action being taken.
Oh, definitely. Before I do mine, I just want to add, I 100% agree. I actually wrote a paper about it in school, and I went and asked 8 or 9 of my friends, Mexican American, some straight Mexican, how do you feel about the chant? And save for 2 of them, they're yeah, I understand why people do it, and I get why, whatever, but it's not good. And the 2 people were I don't really have a problem with the chant, but if they're gonna start making sanctions against the team, we should just stop doing it. If it's going to hurt the team that I care about, we should probably just stop. And I really wish people got that, not just with that chant, but also the racism that happens in Europe where fans are I'm going to racially abuse a player. It's well, do you really care about the Turkish national team, yeah, then why don't you stop racially abusing the player so they don't have to face fines and point sanctions because of you being stupid? Like, if you really care, sure, like maybe stop. If you don't really care, do that at home. Like, I'm not saying to stop, which you should stop. I cannot highlight that enough. You should stop doing it. But if you're not going to stop, go home. Do it in front of your television by yourself. Like, just, you want to yell at chant, you want to do a Nazi salute or whatever, cool. Do it in front of your TV with no one else there. Just whatever. But don't go out in public and, like, be a jerk about it. Because, like, that makes things harder for everyone else. But my hero of the week, a last week player, but still had a stellar game, Jack Harrison of Leeds, hat trick. To watch his growth from a college soccer player at Wake Forest to a starlet at the MLS with New York City FC, and then to watch him just kind of matriculate his way to Leeds and become a kind of a leading man for this club is nuts, honestly, because there's a time where people were wondering if he would ever figure it out to play over in Europe. And now he is one of the young kind of middle-aged stars of the league who I won't say could be the face of it, but like will be one of those people who can consistently have his name called, might even play himself into a bigger contract with a better team. So just to see that growth, as people probably realize, I like watching things grow a lot. It's very satisfying. Just to see the growth of that player from, as Ariel Castillo on Twitter said, she's like, I used to record games of him on like a crappy iPhone, like behind like bleachers as people were being loud, and now he's on Sky Sports TV with a match ball after scoring 3 goals in an English Premier League game. Like, it's nuts just to see people do that, and I, for one, love it. So I'm that's my hero of the week, or my winner of the week, because I really appreciate his growth, and he hasn't shown to be a jerk. So I'm all for that. And if he comes out and is one, then I'll have to retroactively take that back. But we'll talk about that if that comes.
I'll definitely keep an eye on your Twitter feed in case he ever proves to be a jerk in the future. Well, Fletcher, that does it for this week's show, man. Thank you so much for filling in for Jeremy. I'm sure he'll be happy to have had the load lightened for him this week.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys thinking that I had the stuff to come in and not, fail horribly in replacing him for this week. So yeah, I it's a fun thing. I enjoy the show, so to actually get the tap to come on, even if it is just for a week, is like cool. Now something I listen to is gonna, have my thumbprint on it for this year, so I can put that feather in my cap.
Yeah, dude, absolutely. Well, if you ever want to listen to Fletcher and what he has to say more of, definitely give him a follow on Twitter. You can find him at SaintFDW. You can also find his work on Daily Detroit. Fletcher, dude, it's been a pleasure, and we'll talk with you soon, my man.
Yep, thanks for having me again.